On August 1st, 2024, the 911 dispatch center in Limestone County, Alabama, received a call filled with desperation. An 8-month-old baby boy, Jonah, had been found unresponsive inside his own home. Within hours, what began as a medical emergency turned into a criminal investigation, shaking the small, tight-knit community of Athens to its core, as court records, police reports, and witness statements later revealed. This was not only the story of one family's tragedy, it was also the story of missed opportunities, ignored warning signs, and the fatal cracks in a system meant to protect children. This is not an easy story to hear, but it is a necessary one, because understanding what happened to Jonah may be the key to preventing another child from suffering the same fate. Every single day, thousands of children depend on adults to notice when something is wrong. And the question we must carry with us is this: how many alarm bells need to ring before someone finally speaks up? We will not linger on graphic detail. What follows is painful, but it is the truth that cannot be ignored. No child should ever endure what Jonah endured, and it is your empathy, your willingness to listen, and your courage to face these hard realities that make telling this story meaningful. Because when we remember Jonah, we also make a promise that his death will not vanish into silence, that out of this loss, we will find the strength to stand up, to speak out, and to protect other children before it is too late. Athens, Alabama, is the kind of small town people imagine when they think of peace and community. Early in 2024, that quiet town welcomed twin boys' 2 lives that doubled the joy of their family. One of them was Jonah. Jonah only lived for 8 months in family photos. His bright eyes and sweet smile shine through, and relatives say his laughter had a way of softening even the hardest day. His twin brother is still here, growing up without him, and it is that cruel contrast that makes this story so haunting. Much of Jonah's daily care fell on his father. Neighbors often saw him outside, gently pushing the stroller, pointing out birds in the sky or trucks on the road, narrating the world to his boys so they could delight in it. He was patient, steady, trying to hold his little family together, while his partner's presence grew more inconsistent. Every account paints him the same way: a father determined to create normalcy, to give his sons the stability they deserved. But a parent's love, no matter how deep, cannot replace the safety net that a whole community and system are supposed to provide. When families begin to show cracks, it takes relatives, friends, and neighbors to step in, to notice, to help. And in this family, the cracks were already visible. Jonah's mother, Morgan Skye Thornton, was only 30, but she carried a troubling history. Just weeks before Jonah's death, police documented a chaotic night Morgan drove drunk with children in the car. When officers intervened, she lashed out so violently that she even assaulted one of them. It was the kind of incident that should have triggered an immediate safety review for the children, but instead it was filed away as just another criminal charge. And in her private messages, there was more. Morgan sometimes referred to Jonah in words no child should ever hear: a demon, something less than human. Outsiders might dismiss such words as angry outbursts, but to those inside the family, they should have been a terrifying warning sign. The tragic irony is that Morgan's public image was the complete opposite. Just days before Jonah's death, she was posting cheerful photos from Nashville's airport, smiling like any young mother on her normal day. That split between the happy face she showed the world and the chaos unfolding behind closed doors is one of the reasons so many signs went unnoticed. Relatives later admitted they had noticed small changes: video calls with the twins that grew strangely quiet, planned visits that were canceled at the last minute. At the time, they brushed those things off as everyday inconveniences. Only later would they realize those moments were silent alarms. These weren't random glitches of life, they were signals. A muted call, a canceled visit, a message describing Jonah in cold, demeaning language. Each one may have seemed minor alone, but together, they painted a clear picture of risk, a picture someone should have put together sooner. Children cannot raise alarms for themselves. They depend on us, the adults who see, who hear, who notice to recognize when something is wrong. In Jonah's case, silence in the face of those early signs opened the door to a tragedy that could never be undone. The final week of July 2024 seemed, on the surface, like any other week, but for this family, It was the most dangerous time yet, a moment when any intervention might have changed the course of Jonah's life. This chapter looks at the escalation inside the home, the erratic behavior of the mother, the helplessness of the father, and the silence of the very systems designed to protect children. What follows is not sensationalism, but a careful tracing of the official record to understand how opportunities to save Jonah slipped away. If the subject feels heavy, take a pause. The goal here is not to shock, but to learn how to recognize when risk is rising around a child. Court records describe Morgan's behavior as increasingly erratic. Her drinking, already a factor in previous arrests, became more frequent and harder to control. The father, meanwhile, tried to hold the household together, caring for the twins, shielding them as best he could, and carrying the impossible weight of compensating for a partner spiraling out of control. From the outside, this picture can look deceptively stable, a parent keeping routines intact, children still seen out and about. But inside the home, the danger was already growing. And at precisely this turning point, the system was absent. Morgan had just pled guilty to assault and to driving drunk with a child in the car, charges that should have triggered a safety plan. Yet no such plan was put in place. There is no record of Child Protective Services visiting the home. No follow-up assessment after the series of arrests. Each case was handled in isolation criminal court on one side, child services on another, and through those cracks, Jonah remained in harm's way. Research in child welfare has long shown a consistent pattern. The period right after a caregiver's arrest or conviction is one of the highest risk windows for young children. This is when intervention is most needed, but in Jonah's case, that golden window closed with no action taken. What might have been dismissed as bureaucratic delay instead became a fatal gap. And so we are left with the haunting question: how many warning signs are needed before the system connects the dots? When the courts hold one piece, the police another, and child services yet another, who is responsible for seeing the whole picture? As July turned into August, those closest to the family began noticing changes that, in hindsight, demanded intervention. The family's social media posts from this period reflected a growing but unspoken concern. Comments like prayers for the babies and hoping things get better soon suggested awareness, but no action. The following section describes Jonah's final hours, covering the 911 call, emergency efforts, and medical findings. All details are presented in neutral language, drawn directly from official records, with the purpose of analysis and prevention. If you find this subject emotionally difficult, please prepare yourself before continuing. The morning of August 1st began like any other in Athens, Alabama. According to the father's statement to police, he had cared for both twins through the night while Morgan slept. The 911 call, placed early that morning, captured his desperate attempt to save his son. The dispatcher's urgent command, "All units respond immediately," underscored the severity of the situation. If you have ever felt uncertain about a child's safety, understand this speaking up is not an overreaction. Your concern may be the very voice a child desperately needs. Too often, we second-guess our instincts, worrying about causing trouble or being wrong. But child protection experts emphasize this again and again. They would rather investigate 100 unnecessary reports than miss the one child in real danger. Emergency responders arrived to find the father performing CPR on Jonah. The EMS report notes that they briefly detected a faint pulse, sparking hope as they rushed him to the hospital. That hope, however, proved fleeting. Medical staff worked frantically, but Jonah was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The physical indicators documented by medical personnel were consistent with injuries that could not be explained by natural causes or accident. These marks, hidden in plain sight during Jonah's final hours, represent exactly the kind of evidence that mandatory reporters, teachers, doctors, daycare staff are trained to identify. When bruises appear in unusual patterns, when injuries don't match the explanation, when a child shows fear of a specific caregiver, these are not merely troubling signs, they are potential lifelines, demanding immediate reporting. What investigators uncovered in the hours after Jonah's death demanded clinical precision to convey, while still honoring the dignity of such a young victim. This section focuses on the autopsy results and medical details surrounding Jonah's injuries. Every fact comes directly from official records and is presented in a neutral tone, not to shock, but to explain why this case could never be mistaken for an accident. If you are sensitive to descriptions of injuries, Please prepare yourself before continuing. The goal here is not sensationalism, but to underline the warning signs that must be recognized sooner in other cases. The preliminary findings from the medical examiner, recorded in court documents, revealed what authorities classified as severe physical abuse. While not every detail of the autopsy was made public, both to preserve legal integrity and to protect Jonah's dignity, the report was clear his injuries did not align with any accidental cause. The patterns of bruising and structural trauma pointed unmistakably to intent. This forced investigators to shift the case away from the possibility of a tragic accident and firmly into the category of a criminal homicide. It was a sobering reminder of why forensic science matters without this meticulous analysis. Jonah's death might have been misclassified as sudden infant death syndrome and quietly closed without answers. Morgan's behavior in the first hours of questioning raised additional red flags. According to the police report, she appeared disoriented and unable to provide a coherent account. Her brief statement, "I wrapped him and put him down at 7 p.m. I don't remember anything after that," stood in sharp contrast to the physical evidence. A blood alcohol test confirmed intoxication, consistent with her documented history of alcohol abuse. Meanwhile, the father's testimony painted an entirely different picture. He described desperately performing CPR, clinging to the faintest chance of saving his son. For him, the tragedy was compounded by a second grief, not only losing his child, but knowing he had been in the same home, separated by just a door, when the fatal injuries were inflicted. That dual anguish reflects the painful truth in many such cases: a parent's love and vigilance, no matter how steadfast, cannot replace the broader safety net that is supposed to exist around children. From a child protection standpoint, many of Jonah's injuries match precisely the patterns that mandatory reporters, doctors, nurses, teachers, daycare staff are trained to identify. When bruises don't align with the explanation, when trauma appears in unusual locations, when a child shows fear of a particular caregiver, these are not vague suspicions, they are action signals, and while professionals are legally bound to report them, every citizen has the ability and the responsibility to raise concern when something feels wrong. Looking back, the haunting questions remain. If those dehumanizing messages had been reported, if the DUI with children in the car had triggered a CPS safety check, if Jonah's abnormal physical signs had been linked together in time, could his 8 months of life have stretched further? These are not questions directed at a single individual. They belong to all of us, to the system, and to the community that surrounds every child. After Jonah's death, the town of Athens fell into a heavy silence. But behind that quiet, a team of investigators from the Limestone County Sheriff's Office launched a full-scale inquiry. What they uncovered did more than expose the tragedy of one family. It revealed a broader picture of systemic weakness. Arrest records and court filings made one thing painfully clear: opportunities for intervention had been missed, opportunities that could have changed Jonah's fate. What comes next draws from fragments that are difficult to face messages, family testimonies, alarms that had already sounded but were swallowed by silence. These details are not easy to hear, but they matter because if we fail to name them, we risk missing the very signals that might prevent another child from slipping through the cracks. Investigators collected testimony from Morgan's relatives' statements filled with both anger and helplessness. One paternal aunt, speaking to local media, broke down as she called Morgan an evil witch. She recalled that Morgan had even boasted in text messages about harming Jonah. Those very messages, now part of the criminal evidence, had once circulated within the family, but were never forwarded to authorities. That silence within the circle closest to Jonah was enough to smother the alarm before it could ever be heard. Detectives also combed through Morgan's digital trail. They found her smiling brightly in a check-in photo from Nashville's airport, taken less than 24 hours before Jonah's death. That carefree image, contrasted with the turmoil unfolding inside the home, is a sobering reminder social media often serves as a mask, and for those who only look at the surface, the truth stays invisible. Perhaps most alarming of all, the files revealed a fatal gap between institutions. Morgan had recently been arrested for assault and had pled guilty to DUI with children in the car, yet each of these events was treated as an isolated criminal matter. Not once did they trigger a child safety review. No social worker ever came to the house. No protective plan was drawn up. The courts, the criminal justice system, and child protective services all moved on separate tracks, never converging, and in that space between, Jonah remained in danger. What lingers most painfully is this: the signs were all there, but no one put them together. When warnings stayed buried in unreported text messages, when one agency's files never reached another, the full picture remained a scatter of disconnected fragments, and in that disconnection, a child was left behind his alarm bells ringing, but unheard. Once the harsh details of the investigation had come to light, the story moved into a new stage, the courtroom. On August 1st, 2024, Morgan Sky Thornton was arrested initially on charges of aggravated child abuse, but when the autopsy confirmed the extent of Jonah's injuries, prosecutors escalated the case to capital murder, one of Alabama's most severe charges, applied when the victim is under 14 and the death involves extreme physical cruelty. The Limestone County District Attorney's Office argued that the evidence was overwhelming. Morgan had been the sole caregiver during the critical window of time. Her blood alcohol level confirmed intoxication, and her prior history of violent behavior showed a dangerous pattern that was escalating. The defense, while not denying the tragedy, sought to push for lesser charges, framing the case as the result of alcohol dependency and impaired judgment rather than intentional murder. Legal observers noted that, while a capital charge had been filed, the possibility of a plea deal remained common in high-profile cases like this. Morgan is currently held without bail under Alabama's Aniah's Law, a statute passed after another tragic case, which allows judges to deny bail in serious violent crimes. The judge's decision reflected not only the severity of the allegations, but also Morgan's complex criminal history. The case drew wide media attention from local outlets like WAF and WZDX to national coverage by Law and Crime, placing the family under an intense public spotlight. Painful as that attention was, it also created necessary pressure to ensure Jonah's death would not be quietly forgotten, and to remind the public that cases like his demand not just an individual verdict, but broader answers about how the system protects vulnerable children. Jonah's death was not only a family tragedy, it was a mirror reflecting deadly gaps in the child protection system. Every detail from court filings to family text messages, from arrests to whispered prayers could have been a chance to intervene. But each chance was lost. There were warning signs documented clearly in court records, yet they never triggered involvement from child protective services. Threatening text messages circulated within the family, but were never reported. Agencies that held vital data operated like isolated islands, never linking their fragments into a complete picture. When the puzzle pieces are never connected, the consequences fall on children, those least able to defend themselves. In the aftermath, talk began in Alabama about a Jonah's Law, a proposal that would require CPS involvement immediately when a caregiver is arrested for violence or DUI with a child present. It cannot undo the past, but it may be the first step to ensuring that warnings are never ignored again. The impact of Jonah's death reached far beyond the pain of one family. In Athens and across Limestone County, it became the catalyst for difficult but necessary conversations. Are we, as a community, alert enough to protect our most vulnerable children? After the funeral, community forums brought together parents, teachers, police officers, and social workers. The questions were direct. When does a small sign count as a warning? When does silence become danger? Concrete changes followed. The Limestone County Sheriff's Office began training officers to better recognize early indicators of child abuse. Hospitals expanded training for doctors and nurses, stressing that a bruise or an inconsistent explanation could be a vital clue in a larger picture. Next, the story also turns toward ongoing concerns because the tragedy did not end with Jonah. His surviving twin brother became both a symbol of hope and a reminder of an unhealed wound. He will grow up with the memory, spoken or unspoken, of a twin who is no longer there. The community's responsibility is not only protection, but also healing, ensuring this child can grow in safety without the weight of a shadowed past. Jonah's father, too, carries a lasting legacy. From the desperate 911 call, to the exhausting CPR, to the devastating moment of loss, his journey reflects a love that never faltered, but also invisible scars. Families who survive tragedies like this need more than passing sympathy. They need long-term support, psychological care, legal protections, and a community that does not turn away. And that is perhaps the deepest lesson legal reforms and procedures matter. But protecting children ultimately begins with the courage of adults to act when they see something wrong. 8 months, that was all the time Jonah had in this world. In the rare photos of him, his smile is clear and unguarded, like every child who trusts the world to be safe. That trust was betrayed, but from this tragedy, another kind of legacy is being written, a reminder that we cannot look away. Jonah's paternal family has established a memorial fund in his name, dedicated to child abuse prevention programs in Alabama. For them, it is not just remembrance, but transformation, turning pain into action, so that other families may receive the protection Jonah never did. Schools have added child safety education to their curriculum, teaching children that seeking help is a form of courage. And on social media, once a space where Morgan projected a facade of normalcy, awareness, and vigilance have now taken root. But above all, one small child remains Jonah's twin brother. He is living proof that reform and vigilance are not abstract ideals, but concrete protections for real lives, in real homes. Jonah's death exposed deadly gaps, ignored alarms, disconnected agencies, and relatives who stayed silent. Each of those details, if viewed differently, might have rewritten the story. And that is what confronts us. Jonah's tragedy was preventable. No one can bring Jonah back, but his legacy can stand as a call to do better, to listen more closely, to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, and to never hesitate to speak up. Every child deserves to grow up in a world where safety is not left to chance, but guaranteed by the vigilance and compassion of the adults around them. Jonah is no longer here to speak, but we can be his voice, and the voice for countless other children still waiting to be protected. Protecting children demands vigilance, awareness, and the willingness to act. It means supporting families struggling with addiction before a crisis strikes. It means insisting that our systems communicate and coordinate to safeguard the vulnerable. It means believing children when they show fear, investigating when injuries don't add up, and intervening when warning signs appear. Awareness is the light that prevents silence from winning. In Jonah's memory, and for the safety of all children, let that light shine. Your vigilance, your voice, your action, these are the tools that save lives. Let's do it.